Right now we are in a series called Love Hacks. Say Love Hacks with me. Love Hacks. Have you guys seen like life hacks online? Life hacks are all like innovative or cool ways in order to do something that you haven't done before, like do something more efficiently. There's life hacks all about how to make this dish better, how to clean this thing better, and so we are in a series right now called Love Hacks, in which we are learning about love, like love proverbs. And we are in a book right now called 1 John, and John was a man who was a disciple of Jesus, so he knew Jesus, and so we want to learn about love from someone who knew Jesus himself. And so John is writing to the church today, and he's talking to them about love. And so if you have your Bible today, we are going to be in 1 John, starting off in chapter 2, and then we're going to be going into chapter 3 here in just a moment. Before I do, I want to tell you about a conversation that my wife and I had a couple months ago. We were driving through the mountains, and we were having a conversation about all the different people we are grateful for. We are naming different people in our church community, people that we were thankful for, and attributes that made us smile. And so many of your names were named in this drive, in this conversation that we were having. But one particular couple came up, and we talked about one of the couples in our church named Lou and Linda Covey. And we were talking about how quirky they are, how weird they are, how lovely they are. And then there's something that my wife said about Lou and Linda Covey that really stuck with me. She said, "What I love about Lou and Linda is that we could mess up really, really bad, and they would love us all the same." And that, if you know Lou and Linda, that is exactly the kind of people that they are. It doesn't matter how bad you screw up, they will love you all the same. See, there is some assurance that inspires right action that Lou and Linda have for me. See, because Lou and Linda love me like a 10. And so for Lou and Linda, I'm inspired to be a 10 for them. I'm inspired to do my best. I'm inspired to give my best sermon. I'm inspired to be the best parent I can be because they think the world of me, and it inspires me to be better. Maybe you have someone like that in your life. You have a grandparent, you have a spouse, you have a friend who thinks of the world of you. And so because of that, it inspires you, it motivates you to be and do better. These past couple weeks, we've been talking about our love hacks. We've been going through a couple things. The first love hack that we had was to ask Jesus to love or help you love someone that you don't like. Last week, we talked about a love hack, trading satisfaction that won't last for a love that won't run out. And this week, our love hack is going to be, how would you act if you were convinced that you were fully loved? How would you act differently if you were convinced that you were fully loved? And so John is going to paint this picture of what it looks like to be someone who has the full assurance of love, to be fully convinced that you are a child of God, and what that does to our actions. What does that do to our choices? What does that do to the kind of life that we live? We're going to be in chapter 2, starting off in verse 28. And it says this: "And now, dear children, remain in fellowship with Christ, so that when he returns, you will be full of courage and not shrink back from him in shame. Since we know that Christ is righteous, we also know that all who do what is right are God's children." Chapter 3, verse 1, "See how very much our Father loves us." One translation says, "He has lavished his love onto us, for he calls us his children." And that is what we are. But the people who belong to this world don't recognize that we are God's children because they don't know him. Dear friends, we are already God's children, but he has not yet shown us what he will be like when Christ appears. But we do know that we will be like him, for we will see him as he really is. And all who have this eager expectation will keep themselves pure, just as he is pure. Everyone who sins is breaking God's law. For all who sin is contrary to the law of God. And you know that Jesus came to take away our sin, and there is no sin in him. Anyone who continues to live in him will not sin. But anyone who keeps on sinning does not know him or understand who he is. Dear children, don't let anyone deceive you about this. When the people do what is right, it shows that they are righteous, even as Christ is righteous. But when the people keep on sinning, it shows that they belong to the devil, who has been sinning since the beginning. But the Son of God came to destroy the works of the devil. Those who have been born into God's family do not make a practice of sinning, because God's life is in them. So they can't keep on sinning, because they are God's children. So now we can tell who are children of God and who are children of the devil. Anyone who does not live righteously and does not love others does not belong to God. There are two big objectives that John is having in writing to this church. This church that John is writing to is fragmented. They are divided. They are people who have lost their ability to effectively do ministry because there is disunity within the church. And in week 1, we talked about the importance of loving one another and having unity with one another. And so today John is talking specifically about two objectives that he is looking for the church, for the believers to be able to know. And I believe that these two things will be pivotal, not only in your relationship with God, but it also will be pivotal in your relationship with your spouse, pivotal in your relationship with your loved ones, be pivotal in your relationship with other people. The first is this. John's desire is that we would discover greater assurance in their identity as God's children. John says, remain in the fellowship of Christ. You'll be full of courage when he comes, because he calls us his children. Right now, my wife and I are Netflixing a new show called Anne with an E. Have you seen any of those? Anne with an E. Is anyone like Anne of Green Gables fans in here? Anne of Green Gables? I'll be honest, I'll say it. If I got to turn in my man card right now, I don't even care. Anne of Green Gables is a quality show. Of course, it was an old movie, and it's also a book, and it's about this orphan girl up in north of Nova Scotia, whatever's north of Nova Scotia. She's up there in Green Gables in this area, and she's an orphan, and it's at the end of the 1900s, and so they don't have TV or anything like that. And she's an orphan, and the story circles around a brother and a sister who are getting older in age, and they have a ranch, and so they go and they call the orphanage that they would send a boy that they can adopt so that he can continue working on the farm. Well, this brother and sister of old age end up getting not a boy, but a girl that looks like this. And Anne is full of imagination. She is curious. She's inquisitive. She's intelligent. She puts her foot in her mouth, and it makes for a really, really funny. Really funny show. Anyway, so the TV series that we're watching is sort of like a new adaptation of Anne with an E, Anne of Green Gables. And so they really sort of stretch out the story a little bit, and I kind of really appreciate it, because the first couple episodes are all about how Anne is having a hard time finding belonging. Because she first gets to the brother and the sister of old age, and they said, no, we didn't send for you, we wanted a boy. And she said, I don't want to go back, help me earn my keep, I can do anything a boy can, and I can work outside, and I can do the farm stuff, and yada, yada, yada. And so they said, okay, we'll give you a trial run to be basically until that will accept you basically into our family. And so she goes through the week, and bad circumstances happen, and I won't ruin the story for you, but she's sent away, then she kind of comes back, and she's in this place of an in-between state of kind of being in the family, but not really being a part of the family. Like she's there, but she doesn't belong, and she's sort of in that in-between state. And there's something that she said to the older woman that caught me off guard. She says, I don't want to get too attached, not if it's going to disappear. I don't want to get too attached for fear that it will all disappear. See, Anne, she was, in her earlier life, she was sort of kicked around from different place. So she had sort of separation anxiety. She didn't want to get connected to too many people because she knew the hurt and the pain of being torn away from people that she loves. And so she looks at the woman and says, I don't want to get too attached, not if it's all going to disappear. Well, the brother and the sister decide, you know what, we want you, Anne. We want you to be in our family. And Anne's still having a hard time reconciling knowing that she's part of the family. And so they bring her into the living room and they bring out the family Bible. And they open it, like, not like your digital family Bible, like the huge family Bible that they had that they actually passed down from like generation to generation. And so they open it up to the front page and there's like 4 or 5 generations of names of each one of the family members. And they said, we want you to be a part of our family and take our name. And so Anne took out the feathered pen and she goes and she writes her name, Anne, with an E. And then she writes the last name of the brother and sister. And in that moment, she became family. I think this episode, watching this with my wife this past week, it reminded me that relational assurance comes before personal vulnerability. That relational assurance comes before personal vulnerability. For Anne, she didn't want to be too vulnerable because she didn't have the assurance that she was going to stay in the family for the long term. She didn't want to open herself up. She didn't want to, she didn't want to get too attached for fear that she was going to disappear. This is a lesson that not only applies to Anne of Green Gables, but it applies to you and I very, very well. Vulnerability is something that every relationship needs, but in order to have a relationship of full vulnerability, it needs to have full assurance as well. See, assurance is vital in your relationships. See, if your friendship is unsure of where you stand with one another, you're more likely to be interested in impressing them than inspiring them. Dating relationships are just meant to self-destruct. For those of you that are dating in this room, I do not envy you in the least, because you're in a perpetual state of needing to be vulnerable enough for someone to know you, but not too vulnerable to where you open yourself up for damage, right? That's why I think a lot of times these dating relationships that last forever, it's ultimately going to self-destruct because you can't be so vulnerable without full assurance that the relationship is going to be healthy in the long term. Assurance is vital in relationships. If you're married in this room, you know that you don't bring up the D word. And by the D word, I mean the divorce word. Because the moment in a spouse and a marriage relationship that you even entertain the idea of the divorce, all of a sudden couples speak on the defense. They're looking to protect themselves rather than solve a conflict. Because the moment that there is a question of your assurance in a relationship, all of a sudden it doesn't become about solving the problem, but about defending myself. Can you see how it's important? If you need to have full vulnerability, you also need to have full assurance. Because if I'm in my relationship with my wife, if I know that there is full assurance that death to us part, we are in it to win it to the very end, it enables me to be more vulnerable, to be more honest, to be more transparent, to be more authentic. But if I'm in a relationship where I don't know where I stand with this person, I am fearful that I'm going to lose it, I am fearful of what this will do to our dynamic, then I'm going to hold back on vulnerability, therefore holding back on honesty, holding back on authenticity, holding back on transparency, and ultimately that is not the way that a healthy relationship works in the long run. I'm not advocating that, you start dating and you start being vulnerable from day one. I am saying it should go somewhere, though, because there is a lot of assurance in this ring. But it's not just a ring. You have to put this ring on and say, the D word isn't even going to come into my mind. That isn't an option for us. Because the assurance of this thing will enable you to be vulnerable, will enable you to be transparent, will enable you to be honest with one another. The assurance of this thing is powerful. it's not fair for us to expect full vulnerability from someone if they don't have our full assurance. And it doesn't just work for your relationship with your wife or your friendship or you're a family member or a boss. It works in our relationship with God as well. That's why John goes on and says, you are his children. You are already his children. He has lavished his love on you. Because John is pointing out in very blatant terms that we should be assured of where we stand in our relationship with God. You see, the friendship, or you see that the person who isn't assured of their daughtership, they won't value integrity and character when popularity or association is on the line. Association is important. A person who isn't assured of their sonship won't take correction very well because insecurity will cause defensiveness or probably even worse, apathy. Assurance is important. A person who is assured of their daughtership, someone who knows that they are a daughter of the King, will be able to endure and persevere through great affliction because the promise of God's heir is solidified within them. They know that they are assured. A person who is assured of their sonship will be more courageous to imagine, to dream, to discover. Assurance is important. And assurance isn't just a feel-good, complimentary gift that John says that we should take on, like thanks for coming to the party, here's your gift of assurance, as you go from here. Assurance is vital in the maturing of the spiritual believer. You can't grow in God and grow in faith and walk this life not knowing that you are assured of where you stand with him. You can't do it. You can't fully mature. You can't be fully developed. You can't constantly be going through your relationship with God wondering where you stand with him. Did I do good enough this week? Am I still accepted by you? Every time the pastor says, is there anyone who wants to accept Christ today? Every week you feel like you have to raise your hand just to be sure. Assurance is important in the development of the spiritual believer. And John is writing to a church that is trying to muscle their way into the family. When God says, you've already written your first and last name into the family Bible. And so with that assurance, we're able to be vulnerable, we're able to be honest, we're able to be authentic, we're able to open ourselves up because he calls us children. We are his, and he is mine. So John is writing to the believers of this church, and he says, I pray that you would know, that you would be secure in the fact that you are a son and a daughter. He even goes to say, so that you would not be in shame when Christ comes, but that you would be courageous, that you would know exactly who you are and where you stand. And so John is going on and he's talking about assurance. He's talking about how you should be assured of where you stand with God. Because ultimately, in this second objective that John has for us, he says, not only do I want you to discover the great assurance of your identity, but secondly, I need you to exhibit the righteous character of Jesus. Because if you notice in the passage that we read, he goes on to say, you are his son, you are his daughter. And sons and daughters will live in him, and they won't sin. Because anyone who keeps on sinning does not know or understand who he is. Because when we discover our assurance, our sonship, our daughtership of the King, it naturally makes us more confident that we're a part of God's family. It naturally inspires us to be able to do and be like the one that we're following. Because the point is this, is that people become who they closely follow. People become, you and I become, the people that we closely follow. I don't need to tell you, parents, how your children will mimic you, right? In the best and probably even more so in the worst kind of ways. Am I right? All of a sudden, our children begin to talk like us a little bit. They begin to walk like us a little bit. I was reading a study about how children adopt 91% of their parents' worldview. They carry on their entire, 91% of their worldview they grab from their parents. What a daunting task. Because our children follow us. Because people become who they closely follow. They were talking about, child obesity is the big thing right now, and I was reading a study, a really recent study that said that parents who want to reduce their child's inactivity may have to pay attention to their own lifestyle. Like a study needed to tell us that if you want your kid to be healthy, get up off the couch and be active. Because people become who they closely follow. And so as a son, as a daughter of the King, as someone who has full assurance in your relationship with Jesus, as someone who is in the Word, who is praying, who is serving, you will naturally exhibit the character of Jesus because you are following Him. Because you are following Him. Because when you naturally have the assurance of Christ, when you know where you stand with Him, when you know where you are with Him, no longer are you trying to live to impress Him, but it's just a natural outflow of the changed, transformed life of you following your dad. I love putting a Bjorn on my son, although he's 9 months now, so he doesn't like that very much. But I loved putting a Bjorn on, and then putting my son right on my chest. And we go for a walk, around town, and it strikes me that Clyde doesn't care where we're going as long as he's with Daddy. Like he doesn't ask, okay, Dad, what's the plan today? He just simply follows Dad, and as long as I'm there, Clyde's good. And naturally, we become those who we closely follow. So my applicational big idea is this. Our life hack is a question this week. How would you act differently if you knew you were loved fully? How would you act differently if you knew you were convinced beyond the shadow of a doubt that you were loved fully? That you were someone who has full assurance in God's kingdom. That you were a child of God. I think that there's two groups of people in this room today. The first is this. I think there are some, if we're being called to action, I think there's some of us who have been lazy with God's assurance. There have been some of us who have been lazy in God's assurance. There's some of us who have felt the call to sonship, the call to daughtership, and we've accepted it. But rather than, remember Lou and Linda, they inspire me to be better. There's those of us who aren't living up to our full limit of our potential. Rather than the assurance of Christ, fueling us to be better, I think that there's some of us in this place today that maybe have grown lazy in our assurance. We have grown apathetic in our pursuit. And at the end of the day, we are simply okay having a last name of the King, but we haven't become who we're closely following. The second call to action today is I believe that there's some of us who have been busy trying to earn God's acceptance. We have been busy trying to muscle our way into assurance. And because we have been trying to wrestle our way into assurance, we're not trying to be like the King as much as just a more perfect version of ourselves. And for you today, I challenge you just to ask this question and to reflect on this question. How would you act differently if you knew you were loved fully? As the worship team comes up here right now, if I had to answer this question honestly, how would I act differently if I knew that I was loved fully? I think I would spend a little bit less time on busy work and a little bit more time, quality time with my dad, both physical and, God. If I knew that I was loved fully, I think I might be more honest in areas of my life that I was struggling, areas of my life that I was tempted by. I wouldn't just confess when I screwed up, but I would confess when there was even a yellow light in my life. If I knew that I was loved fully, I might try a little bit less to keep my pride intact, and I might try to embrace humility a little bit more. If I knew that I was loved fully, I think I wouldn't care as much about how people perceived me when I worshiped or how I prayed. Needed to string together these eloquent phrases together, and I'd try less to impress you and more just try to talk to my God. If I knew that I was fully loved, I was fully convinced, I think I'd walk through my day with a little bit more peace, with a little bit more kindness. I walk through my day with a lot more purpose. And knowing, just a knowledge, just a reminder that our God is walking with me. How would you act differently if you knew that you were loved fully? Because Sacred Church, you are.